Morning. Happy Palm Sunday. Glad you guys joined us as we begin Holy Week, this incredible week in the lives of Christians as we move towards the cross and the resurrection, and we celebrate our only hope in this world is through what Jesus has done for us in those places. And so I'm glad that you're here this morning as we kick off this week. And I want to invite you now to open a Bible with me to John chapter 6. We're in verses 15 through 25 this morning, John chapter 6. You guys good swimmers? Do you guys, any of you good swimmers? I am a terrible swimmer. I blame this on my upbringing in Montana, because in Montana, there was like one pool in our entire city, and you would go to it maybe 1 month out of the year just to kind of bob up and down. There was no swim team at my school. I never heard of water polo. And so when I moved down to Southern California and went to Cal Baptist, and I heard about water polo because I met these guys who became friends and they were on the water polo team, I had no category for that. I'm not exaggerating. I pictured like Ralph Lauren and like horses playing golf like in water or something. I had no concept of water polo. And so I actually went and I saw a game of them playing water polo, and I was so humbled. I was like, you people are like the most strong, overcoming adversity people I've ever met in my life. Like, I don't know how they just tread water like for hours on end. And so as I became friends with other swimmers and water polo players, I finally decided one day, I was like, I really need to learn how to swim. And so me and another friend who was a musician, he was not a swimmer, he was not an athlete, we decided to take a swimming class in college, and I'll never forget that first day of swim class. They had us do a 12-minute swim, and my friend Brad went first. And I started out being like, I'm just going to be his encourager. And I don't know what happened, but after one lap, I just started mocking Brad. I just made so much fun of Brad because he was just struggling so much. And I could not believe that after 12 minutes, he could only get 8 laps in. So I just teased him the entire time, and it was my turn. And I got in the water. And I maybe did a half a lap. And I thought to myself, oh no. My goal was I have to get 8 laps. I have to get 8 laps because what does that mean for me? I just made fun of my friend for barely getting 8 laps. And so I want to admit I did get 8 laps barely. By the skin of my teeth, I swam 8 laps. But I will never forget just the feeling of anxiety and hopelessness that I felt in the middle of that pool, as I felt like I was going absolutely nowhere. And so at the end of that class that day, I went over to the teacher, and I pointed over to the shallow end of the pool that was 5 yards shorter, and I said, would it be okay if for the rest of the semester I just swam over there? So that if I ever wanted to, I could just stand up in the pool. And they just looked at me, they probably saw me swim already, and they went, sure, no problem. And so for the rest of the semester, I laid aside my pride and all humility just swam in the shallow end. I think I got an A. I got a passing grade. But I was way overconfident in my abilities. And when I faced those waters, I was struggling, and I remember thinking, man, if I can't even swim in a pool, how in the world could I ever swim in any other type of water that is less controlled than a pool, right? I think sometimes our dumb overconfidence gets us into difficult situations, but many times in life, you and I know, it's not feeling dumb or overconfident that gets in those difficult situations. We just end up finding ourselves in difficult places. I don't know, again, if you would consider yourself a good swimmer, but no matter how good you are, you eventually will meet your match. You eventually will find yourselves in some type of waters where you will feel overwhelmed by them. Right? Call it what you want. Call it a trial, call it a storm, call it a fearful circumstance, call it adversity. And so as we begin our time in God's Word this morning, I'm curious if you could picture in your mind just whatever it is that you would say you're facing this morning. Like, what are you facing this morning? What are the waters that feel a little turbulent in your life? Can you picture that? If you could picture that, this story is going to be really helpful for you. If you can picture it. Where are the waters rough for you? Where do you feel like you're treading water? where you are at a place where you're like, I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere anymore. I'm just trying to stay afloat, right? This is exactly what we see in our text today. We see the disciples treading water, and the only reason we are told that they get safely to shore is because of Jesus and this private, jaw-dropping miracle that he performs for them. Beginning in verse 15, what do we see? Perceiving then, Jesus is perceiving that this crowd that he just fed, these 5,000 people, perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. And when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. And when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. On the next day, the crowd that remained on the other side of the sea saw that there had only been one boat there, and that Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone away alone. Other boats from Tiberias came near the place where they had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. So when the crowd saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they themselves got into the boats and went to Capernaum seeking Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" When did you come here? This first part of our story, we see the fear of the disciples. They're in a really bad situation. They're treading water. And so the first thing I want to ask you this morning is, again, just to locate in your mind where it is that you might say you're treading water this morning. Where are you treading water? Put it to you differently. What's that place of fear in your life right now? Where's the adversity? Right, where are you feeling like I'm not making any progress? See, this is a story about fear, and the fear in this story is accentuated by the absence of Jesus. I don't know if you noticed this, but we see in verse 15, the disciples just witnessed and participated in this miraculous event. Jesus feeding a sea of people with only some bread, a little bit of bread, and 2 little fish, right? We looked at this last week, and so these people's response to that miracle is that they want to grab Jesus and make him king. But yet Jesus, for one reason or another, says, that's not what I'm here to do. So he withdraws, and he goes to a mountain. We learn in other accounts he goes to a mountain by himself to pray. And in Matthew's account of this story, we're actually told that Jesus is the one who sends his disciples out onto the sea without him. He sends them off. Verse 11, or chapter 11, verse 22 of Matthew, he made the disciples get into the boat. And so here, the disciples go on ahead without Jesus, and as they started across the sea, which would have been about an 8-mile trek, we see this important note in verse 17, it was now dark. It was now dark. Now, it really was dark. As they get into the middle of this event, Matthew and other accounts tell us that this took place in the 4th watch of the night, so they are now at about 3 a.m., on the middle of this sea, middle of the night, right? But we know from reading John's gospel that yes, it was physically night, but this image of night and darkness consistently has a more profound understanding to it than just the fact that it's not sunny out right now. Right, we saw this in chapter 3 with Nicodemus. Jesus says the light has come into the world, but people loved the darkness and therefore would not come to the light. At the end of John's gospel, when Judas goes out to betray Jesus, John notes, and it was night. He's not just saying it was the evening. He's telling you this is a dark time, a dark moment. And so here, they are on the sea, and it is dark. Worse yet, Jesus had not yet come to them. And this is the tension of our story. It's dark, and they aren't with Jesus. And so this action picks up, and the situation gets worse in verse 18, because what happens? The sea became rough because of a strong wind blowing. This is not a good situation. I don't know if you've ever been on water at night in the middle of a storm. That is not a place of peacefulness. That is not a place of security. No one's looking at each other going, isn't this great? Like, no one's thinking that. This is a terrible situation. And so look at them in verse 19. They are rowing and rowing and rowing. They are treading water. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. And they aren't making headway like they had hoped in this terrifying storm. And so they row, and they row, and they row, and they are at the furthest point from land, in the middle of this lake, in this vulnerable situation, and their fear is climaxing. It's being accentuated at the end of verse 19, because what does it say? They see Jesus walking on the sea, coming near the boat, and here's the climax, and they were frightened. Matthew's account says they thought they saw a ghost. Wouldn't you? You expecting to see anybody in that situation walking towards the boat? Right? I mean, they're scared senseless at seeing Jesus walking effortlessly on the chaotic sea. They don't recognize him. They didn't have this category for Jesus. They certainly were not expecting him to show up where they were. Do you have any places in your life where you are not expecting Jesus to show up? An environment maybe, some place of adversity, some horrible situation where you're like, I'm just trying to stay afloat, and you do not expect Jesus to show up. Just step back for a second and think about the situation they're in. The disciples were probably at an all-time high. They just participated in with Jesus and witnessed him miraculously feed a sea of people. And they're all like, let's make this guy king. And if you're one of the disciples, you're like, I'm on the inner circle of this thing, right? This is like a mountain high sort of exhilarating experience. Just think about the popularity. Things are going so well. And that event is quickly followed by your Lord pushing the boat off into the lake because he's going to go up on the mountain by himself. You find yourself in a moment of desperation after that kind of mountaintop experience. You know, I'm sure they would have rather had Jesus with them in that boat. And so when you think about it, doesn't their circumstance reflect often what our experience is like? I mean, have you ever experienced a similar depressing trial after a mountaintop experience in life? I think we're often surprised when we encounter difficulty, when we encounter confusion, when we encounter different storms, you might say, in life. And I think what's interesting about this experience of the disciples, when you take into consideration the other accounts about this event, is again that Jesus is the one that sent them into this circumstance, which is peculiar to us. Why would he do that? Well, as we're going to see, I think he does this so that they might grow, be strengthened, and ultimately never be the same again. And just like them, for us, life is always much more difficult, always a lot more fearful without Jesus, isn't it? I think many of us often try. If you're being honest, you might try and withdraw from Jesus in your life. Maybe you're here and you're not a Christian, and I'm so glad that you're here. But maybe your entire life you've been trying to almost avoid God, avoid Jesus. You've heard the news. You've heard that Jesus is the Son of God, that he has come into this world to die on a cross for your sin and rise from the dead so that if you believe in him, you could be reconciled to God who made you, the God that you were made to be with. He did that so that you could be right with God. And you've avoided him at all costs because you know what that means, right? You know that means if you were to fully entrust yourself to Jesus, that he would be the Lord of your life, and you kind of want to be Lord of your life. And so you withdraw from Jesus. But I even think as Christians, there's so many times where we've received Jesus, and yet we go through different things in life, and there are moments where we sort of walk up to the door of some place, some environment, some situation. We open the door and we turn back to Jesus and we say, hey, Jesus, if you don't mind just waiting outside, I'm going to go in here for a bit, and then I'll come back out, we'll reconnect later. And we think that that's what we do with Jesus, forgetting that he always comes with us, forgetting that he's always with us. And that, I think, is probably the more difficult part here, if I'm being honest. Because there are other times in life where it seems as if God has distanced himself from us, right? The great joy that we have as Christians, right, is that if you've really been saved, if you really know Jesus, the promise is that he's always with you. You have the Holy Spirit living inside of you. But it doesn't always seem that way. I mean, we sing this hymn at times, I think it's by Edward Mote, called The Solid Rock. There's a great line that says, when darkness seems to hide his face. There is a darkness in life that seems to hide the face of God, where you begin to wonder, God, where are you? Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, he was a famous Welsh preacher in the 20th century. He wrote a really helpful book called Spiritual Depression about this exact idea. This idea that the Puritans would call the dark night of the soul. Being in a place where you're going, God, where are you? Why have you withdrawn yourself from me? It's that sort of perception. And maybe you're there, or maybe you've been there before. And if you're a Christian and you haven't been there and you're not there now, you're going to be there someday. And you're thinking, God, why would you put me through this? Why would you allow this? You're afraid and you wonder, where is God? You're in the darkness and you can't see the way out. What we see and what we feel seems so true. The only thing that's true. It seems so powerful. And so I take great hope. It's medicine to my soul when I read Samuel Rutherford, who says this: believe, we must believe God's word and power more than you believe your own feelings and experiences, because your rock is Christ. And it's not the rock which ebbs and flows, but your sea. And in the middle of the sea, that's all we can feel, right? That seems so true. But the rock has not moved. The rock has not moved. These disciples might have been feeling this way. Jesus, where are you? I guess we're going to have to go through this without him, right? And what we are learning is what Christians all eventually learn. That being a disciple of Jesus is not easy. This story is a much bigger story. It's a picture of our lives. Because life would be so much safer on the shore, wouldn't it? So much safer on the shore. And so Jesus is sending them into this circumstance so that they might grow and never be the same again. I love the exchange between Gandalf and Bilbo in the beginning of the book The Hobbit. It's one of the best exchanges. I love it so much. Because Gandalf shows up to the Shire where Bilbo lives, which is a very safe, comfortable, pleasurable world. And Gandalf says to him, I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, but I can't find anybody. No one wants to do it. And Bilbo says, well, I would think it'd be hard to find somebody in these parts. We are plain, quiet folk, and we have no use for adventures. They're nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. They can make you late for dinner. I can't think of what anybody ever sees in these things. And Gandalf says, well, if you come, You might have a tale or two to tell when you come back. And Bilbo says, oh, can you promise that I'll come back? And Gandalf said, well, no. But if you do, you'll never be the same again. Right? Life would be so much safer on the shore. We want to be on the shore when we are in a storm, but you would remain the same if you stayed on the shore. So what are you facing this morning? What are you afraid of? Where are you treading water? When we are afraid, when we're going through adversity, stress, fear, whatever it is, you would say, whatever is going to bring you peace in that moment, you have to replace that fear with something greater. What is it that's going to bring stillness to that moment? Well, it's only by replacing your fear with something that commands a greater sense of awe. Always. Well, what is it here? It's Jesus. So point number 2, what does it say? What do we say? In the face of our treading water, look where he stands. Look where he stands. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." When you're tired of treading water, don't try harder. Look at Jesus. The disciples are treading water, but Jesus treads on the water. He's the water walker. Right? He's the water walker. I wonder this morning if your view of Jesus is true enough. I'm being very selective with that word. Is your view of Jesus true enough to scare you a little bit? To produce some sense of awe? Is your view of Jesus true enough to where it feels weighty to the point that it would drop you to your knees and put you in awe? I mean, when was the last time you were in awe of Jesus, if you're being honest? When's the last time you were in awe of Jesus? See, if you were to see Jesus in all of his glory, it would appropriately demand fear. It would appropriately demand fear, right? And so there are times, we all understand that there are times when there are certain things that we should do and certain things we should not do, right? There are certain situations you find yourself in where you go, this is appropriate to do this now, this is not appropriate to do this now, right? I mean, just for example, if I ate lunch today and I could eat lunch and I could sit across the table from someone and I could talk while I eat lunch, right? But if I were eating lunch right now, while I was preaching, that'd be weird to you, right? It'd be kind of weird, right? I mean, extreme example here, but it's appropriate for me to go into my kids' room and check on them while they're sleeping, right? It would be inappropriate for me to go into your room and check on you while you're sleeping, wouldn't it, right? I'd be fired or something, I don't know, right? That'd be weird. Okay, there are times where things are appropriate and inappropriate based on the circumstance. I say all this to say, if you were to see Jesus in the fullness of his glory, it would feel very inappropriate to walk up to him and to fist bump him, to walk up to him and shake his hand, to walk up to him and like side hug him, or bro hug him, or fill in the blank, your greeting of choice, hugger, handshaker, whatever you are, right? It would feel very inappropriate to do that. What would be appropriate would be what John's response is when he sees Jesus in the book of Revelation. John, the same guy who's writing this gospel, John, the same guy who knew Jesus so well that it is said that he would lay his head on Jesus' chest. And yet when John sees him in all of his glory, he says, I fell at his feet as if I were dead. Look where he stands. While you're treading water, look where he stands. That is such a helpful picture. Just look at whatever you're facing. Look at where he stands, right? Look where he stands. Do you see what this is saying? Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 famously says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then what does it say? And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Job chapter 9, verse 8 says, God alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. And look where Jesus stands. He stands where only God can stand. If the point isn't clear enough, then listen to his voice, because what does he say next? He says, "It is I, do not be afraid." It is I, do not be afraid. He commands them in the midst of this storm, which again, he doesn't calm the storm. He just tells them in the midst of the storm to not be afraid. And that command echoes from the center of a stormy sea in Galilee, and it reverberates into every single Christian's heart. Do not be afraid. I mean, how can he simply command us to not be afraid and expect us to no longer fear what it is that we're facing? How could he ever do that? Well, do you see what he says? Can you see it? He says, "It is I." In Greek, it's literally ego eimi. Literally, I am. That's what he says. It's weird, isn't it? They're frightened. He looks at them standing on the water and he says, "I am. Do not be afraid." Same phrase he'll use in John chapter 8 when he says, "Before Abraham was, I am." Same phrase he uses in verse 35, "I am the bread of life." He'll say, "I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the true vine." And so, hear him. The disciples are terrified. He speaks and he says, "I am. Do not be afraid." Do you know what he's saying? He is saying what only God has ever said. In the book of Exodus, Moses is walking in the wilderness and he sees a bush burning and it's not being consumed. And he goes, "I'm going to check this out." And he walks over to the bush and God speaks to Moses out of the bush and he says, "Remove your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground." And then he says, "Moses, I want to commission you to go and deliver my people from their slavery in Egypt." And Moses kind of has all these reasons why he shouldn't go and do this. And finally, he gets down in verse 13. He says, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." This is what you're to say to the Israelites: "I am has sent me to you." He is saying what only God has said. He is God. He is God. He stands above whatever it is that you fear this morning. He stands whatever feels the least controllable in your life. He stands above whatever seems the least salvageable. Whatever situation you feel like there's no way out. I got to hunker down and maybe somehow just stay afloat through this season. Right? There's no hope of healing. There's no hope of change. Right? Whatever you see as your great opposition in the darkness, look where he stands. I think about this often when I am afraid of something. Right? Newsflash, I get afraid of things. Right? Maybe you don't, but I do. And when I feel afraid of something, I think, in light of stories like this, God is not afraid of this thing that I'm afraid of. That's so helpful for me. Whatever I'm afraid of, I'll tell myself, God's not afraid of this thing. And the reason is because he stands above it. He stands above it. God is great, so I don't have to be. He's in control, so I don't have to be. He is glorious beyond my comprehension, so I don't need to fear others. I don't need to fear other things. So, where are you treading water this morning? In the midst of you treading water, don't try harder. Look where he stands. Look where he stands. And then lastly, our story plainly, but really importantly, tells us that we don't just look where he stands, we welcome him into our lives. We welcome him into our boat, our lives, the situation that we find ourselves in. And if you do that, what we see in the story is he will safely deliver you to shore. He will. Verse 31 is so simple. But because it is stated so simply, it's showing you the point. They were glad to take him into the boat. This is a mark of humility. I think it's easy to look at their situation and go, well, yeah, of course, right? Of course they would do that, right? But I think it's really hard when you're in places where you're treading water and you're like, I'm going to get through this on my own. It's hard to receive help. It's hard to lay down my paddle and to welcome in someone else to be the all-powerful one. They were glad, right? I want you to see that even though the picture of Jesus in the fullness of his glory will drop you to your knees in awe, if you truly knew him, if you truly knew that he was for you and that he's come in his glory to safely deliver you to shore, then you too would gladly take him into the boat of your life. See, life will have its storms, and we will have times where we feel like we are just treading water, doing everything we can to stay afloat. But Jesus doesn't wait for us to get to shore. He meets you right where you are, the middle of our fear, the middle of your adversity, the middle of your mess. So will you keep him at a distance, or will you welcome him in? Well, they do. And then we have this subtle but pretty significant miracle that happens again. The moment they take him in, they were immediately, John notes, at shore. They didn't find themselves on another island in the middle of the lake. They immediately got to their destination when they welcomed him in. Yet they were initially in like the middle of the sea, right? Doesn't tell you how. The point is, when Jesus got in the boat, they were safely delivered to the shore. The storm didn't stop, doesn't say that. But they were delivered through the storm. Not out of the storm, but through it. See, he's glorious enough to silence your fears if you receive him. He's powerful enough to safely deliver you to shore. You might not always get to where you were hoping to be in this world, but he will safely deliver you to the heavenly shore. See, this whole thing, this whole section of John, again, has been so much about Moses, hasn't it? Right, remember he says, Moses accuses you because you don't recognize who I am, but if you read Moses at the end of chapter 5, he says this, you would have believed in me. He feeds the 5,000 miraculously in the wilderness, and we saw last week that is a greater miracle than God providing manna from heaven. And here, he has now just safely delivered his disciples through a sea. See, just like Moses, God parted the Red Sea, and he delivered his people out of their bondage of slavery, and he destroyed their enemies behind them. But Jesus is the one greater than Moses, who will not just part the sea, he will walk across the sea. What I need you to see this morning is this, is there was a sea between this world and heaven that you and I could never cross. We could never cross it because of the vastness of our sin. And yet Jesus, the greater Moses, has crossed that sea from heaven to earth so that you could be safely delivered to the heavenly shore. He's greater than Moses. He's greater than anything you could fear in this world. And so if you've received him into your life, you could receive the great promise of Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ Jesus. No matter what happens to you in this world, that much is sure, I will make it to that heavenly shore if I have welcomed Jesus into my life. If I have believed upon him, if I have received him. This is what Thomas Watson says. He says, even if a Christian should lose his name, it is written in the book of life. Even if he lose his liberty, his conscience is free. If he lose his estate, he is possessed of the pearl of price. If he meets with storms, he knows where to put in for harbor. You could lose your reputation in this world, but your name is still in that book of life if you believed in Jesus, that you are a son of God, you are a daughter of God. If you've lost your liberty and any freedom in this world, your conscience is free. You're free from your sin. If you lose any of your wealth or possessions, you have the pearl of great price, the treasure hidden in a field. You have him in the person of Jesus. And if you ever find yourself in a storm, there is Jesus, the one who stands above the water that you can put in for safe harbor. He is the I am, the voice behind the unconsumed burning bush in Exodus 3. He walks across the stirring seas. He speaks on behalf of God in the first person. And it's his presence, and only his presence, that will silence our fears. So will you welcome him? Will you actually do that? If you've never done that, if you've never believed in Jesus, would you do that this morning? Are you tired of treading water? If you're a Christian, are you still welcoming him into your life? I'll be honest, when I'm going through a hard time, be honest with you, it is not my natural instinct to pray. Is it yours? It's not my natural instinct to go, God, come into the situation. The old man in me, my flesh, I close up. I hunker down. I get to work. I check out. Do you? The disciples don't say, we got this, Jesus. We want to make you proud. We'll meet up with you at the shore. That was cool. Thanks for showing us that you can do that. No, they said, get in here. Get in here. They gladly welcomed him in, and the same could be true for you today. When we face storms in life, look where he stands and welcome him in. Only he can deliver you safely to shore, and I'll tell you what, if you do that, you will never be the same again. I don't want to ruin the ending, but at the end of this chapter, it'll be a complete opposite of the beginning. The beginning of chapter 6 is a massive crowd of people that are just amazed at Jesus. And at the end of the chapter, that crowd will turn and leave him because he's not going to be the king that they wanted. But at the end, these disciples will look at Jesus and Jesus will ask them, are you going to go away as well? And Peter will say famously, where else will we go? Only you have the words of eternal life. Why do you think they stayed? Why do you think they stayed? Well, we don't have an explicit answer to that, but we do know that between that massive, miraculous feeding of the people and all the people leaving him, the disciples had this moment of going through the storm and experiencing the glory of Jesus in a way that that crowd never saw. And if you can see it in the midst of whatever you're facing, wherever you're treading water, I think the same is true for you. You will never be the same again as he safely delivers you to shore.